Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening from wherever you're joining us in the world today. Pleasure to welcome you to the third in our series of webinars on fundraising in sport for development of 2021. All year throughout the series, we've been overwhelmed with the interest and engagement that we've received. I'm delighted to say that today is no different, with over 400 of you signing up to attend. So thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time today. No doubt our incredible panel will make it well worth your while. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Luke Southall and I'm Managing Director at Oaks. And we work with sport for development organisations right across the world, supporting with strategy, fundraising, sustainability and capacity building. And I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. And today we're doing things a little bit differently. So previous two webinars in the series this year focused on some of the sport for development sector's leading voices, the first being the global networks and the second the change makers. We had some amazing speakers who offered first-hand examples of fundraising best practice from within the sector. The theme of today's session, however, is the external view. So we've got three of the foremost fundraising professionals from outside of the sector here with us today to share some of their insights. I think the reason for this is that too often I think we can all be a bit guilty of being constrained by the relatively limited scope of our own networks and experiences. And so much value obviously that we can glean from looking a bit further afield and having a different perspective. So today we'll be hearing directly some advice and insights into how we can maximize overall fundraising performance, how we can diversify our income sources from fundraising, how the fundraising landscape is changing and what we can do to adapt to make sure we can benefit from it. And then crucially, some very specific advice and guidance in terms of some really specific fundraising areas such as digital fundraising, grant funding, corporate partnerships, individual giving. So some real practical takeaways I'm sure we'll get. But before we go any further, I'll hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves to you guys. So I'll go from left to right. So Katie, over to you first.
Thanks, Luke. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Simmons and I'm the Director of Fundraising Strategy for the British Red Cross. So my role is all about supporting and leading transformational change within our fundraising. For those of you who don't know about the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, we're a global humanitarian organisation really to support people in the moments of most acute crises. And as the British Red Cross, we operate both in the UK and support work of our sister national societies around the globe.
Thanks, Katie. Craig?
Great, thanks, Luke. Hello, everybody. Delighted to be here. Thanks for having me. So I'm Craig Fordham, and I'm the Director of Operations and Legacies at Macmillan Cancer Support. Kind of similar to Katie, I'm responsible for our fundraising strategy and our performance, but also responsible for our Gifts in Wills income stream, which for Macmillan is our biggest income stream. And Macmillan Cancer Support is the UK's leading cancer care charity, providing support, care and information for people living with cancer here in the UK.
Thanks, Craig. Pradnya.
Thanks, Luke. Really thrilled to be here. I'm Pradnya Kapoor. I'm the VP of Development for a global nonprofit called Code.org that is actually based out of Seattle, Washington, but we do work globally, as I said. And our mission is to put computer science education in the hands of every child everywhere. And what that means essentially is through integration into school systems. So in my role, I lead fundraising for the organization globally.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Yeah, and just to say, thanks so much for giving us your time today. It's a real privilege to have the three of you here with us, and I can't wait to hear what you've got to share with us. So, but before we do start, just a final few bits. So I should say that this whole series was launched on the back of our Fundraising and Sport for Development State of the Sector report, which we released in January of this year. Today, excitingly, marks the launch of our survey for the 2022 iteration. So we'll be sharing links in the chat box to the survey, and in all of the follow-up to the session, we'll be giving information. We'd so appreciate if you guys could take just 10 minutes of your time to complete the survey. It's really crucial in helping us to kind of benchmark what's happened in the last 12 months and repaint a picture of fundraising in the sector for the next year. So yeah, we really appreciate that, and all the information will be coming, like I say, in the session and afterwards. some thank yous as well. So all the way through the series this year, we've been supported by our amazing partners. So Street Football World, Laureus Sport for Good Foundation, Beyond Sport and sportanddev.org. And yeah, just a huge thank you for their continued support. Yeah, it's really been crucial for us this year. And just before we go, again, I'm sure there'll be endless amount of questions from you all in the audience. Please, as we go, put them in the Q&A box. There'll be a chat function as well with bits and pieces being shared, but all questions, please go in the Q&A boxes. That'll come through to me and I can put as many of them to our panelists as possible. Right, I think that's all of the admin and intros done. So let's get started. I think just the first thing I just want to focus on kind of the general state of play. And yeah, unfortunately, it's the unavoidable question. We obviously have to talk about the pandemic. So let's get out of the way from the start. We've seen throughout the series so far the devastating impact the pandemic has had on fundraising and the overall sustainability of the sport for development sector. And needless to say, it's a similar story right across for all the majority of non-profits. So Craig, a simple question. I'll start with you first, if I may. Just, yeah, what's the impact been for you guys? What's the impact been on fundraising at Macmillan?
I mean, like everybody else, I'd imagine it has been what a year. I mean, it's felt like 10 years in one, hasn't it? But at Macmillan, it's had a huge impact, but fortunately not the level of impact we had anticipated. So our income was down. We were about 25% down. We're a big organisation, so we had planned to be a £230 million organisation. So for us, that meant a loss of about £45 million. However, we were, when the pandemic started a month in, we thought it could be as bad as a 50% loss. So we were looking at, 115 million loss. So to pull it back, we were pleased, but it's had a massive impact.
Yeah, and what do you think kind of mitigated the forecasted impact? Like, what do you think kind of made it a bit more, a bit less of a devastating impact?
There's a couple of things. I think first of all, some of our income streams held up better than we were anticipating. So particularly those income streams that centered around our really core loyal donors. So those people who have supported us for years, who feel most passionately about us, they really stuck with us in a way that, I mean, we'd hoped they would, but we didn't anticipate the way that they would, and the fact that some of them increased their support for us, which was amazing. That was individuals, companies, trusts. Secondly, our legacy income, went up. That's obviously a very sad thing because it reflects the increased number of deaths in the pandemic. But the fact we've invested in legacy fundraising is something I was glad that we had done. So that held up pretty well. And then thirdly, the way we were able to innovate and try and loads of new ideas. Not all of them worked. Some of them flopped magnificently, but some of them did work and stuck and hauled us out of the hole that we thought we were going to be in.
Great. We'll definitely want to come back to those that flopped and kind of come back to some of the lessons learned. Katie, yes, similar question. How's it for you?
Yeah, and I think probably some of the things that I say all feel quite similar to Craig. I mean, I think we were in an interesting position where we actually had one of our best ever fundraising years last year. And, sort of similar to what Craig was saying with legacies, you never want, good fortune to come on the back of a global crisis. But I think we learned a lot actually about the fact that because the British Red Cross were so involved in frontline response, both in the UK and globally, we actually brought on board a huge number of new supporters and supporters who gave significantly more, recognising that we were one of the organisations that they could kind of channel their support to and were proactively, actually doing something to respond to the pandemic. So that was a really positive sign. And similarly to Craig said, what we saw, we were anticipating some pretty devastating impacts on areas like our individual donations. That really held up much more strongly than we expected, particularly people giving on a regular basis. We expected a lot of people to cancel those commitments to us, and we just didn't see that. I think in the UK market, we've seen a shrinking in most charities in that individual giving space anyway. And I think a lot of charities are left with a sort of really super loyal, committed cohort of supporters. And we really saw that play out. We saw growth, particularly in our corporate fundraising, given that there were a lot of companies. So it's a really, and I'm sure we'll come back to this, it's been a really interesting space because there's lots of companies who've had to withdraw support because they've had some pretty challenging situations, but there were also some companies we know who've actually done well over the last couple of years, and a lot of them, particularly some industries around finance and insurance where people actually wanted to channel their money to us and sort of feel that they were giving something back in terms of frontline response. So, you know, in terms of income, a very positive picture for us. It's interesting now to start to see, though, how that's starting to play out. So some of those areas of our fundraising that we had to turn off last year, some of those have come back really strongly, like our retail operation. We run a chain of over 300 charity shops across the UK. That's been incredibly positive, and people have been back out as soon as the high streets have opened. Some of our other areas around what we would call our community fundraising, so a lot of our sort of people actually out and about doing events and doing things for us, that's been very slow to pick up again. So I think we're starting to see that impact of, you know, some of those longer term income streams, and really starting to understand what the impact will be there.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, so much you've touched on there that I'm sure we will come back to throughout the discussion. Pradnya, how about you at Code.org?
Yeah, so Code.org is interesting. You know, we're a relatively young organization as compared to the two venerable organizations represented by my peers here. We're only 9 years old, and in that time we have been foremost a major gift shop. And so, you know, if one were to visualize a donor pyramid for Code.org, the majority of our donor base would be at the very, very top of that pyramid. And for that reason, it was both high risk and high reward, right? In a pandemic where it had that donor base left us, we would have been in dire straits. Happily, however, that did not happen. They've stuck with us. And in fact, a lot of it was predicated on less about the fundraising dynamics or about, you know, CSR dynamics, and more about the case we were able to make about the growing importance of computer science education in a world where teachers, students, even parents were forced to engage in the digital space more effectively. And so what we found, for example, you know, yes, the money remained steady. We're grateful for that. But what we also found is an entirely new constituency of parents, for example, collecting, you know, close to 1 million parent email addresses in a year, which had never really been a core constituency for us. And so if there's a, you know, I want to agree with what Katie said, that one never wants to see success on the back of a tragedy that this pandemic has been. But if one might look for silver linings, it is in those moments of, you know, have we been able to grow in certain places? Have we been able to make the case that our work is as valuable as it ever was, or perhaps even more valuable than it has been? And then to make the case with funders that the use of their philanthropy might be different, but that they're coming along on the journey with us. And these are all the messages that we've, you know, really been trying to express to our funder base over the last 18 months.
Absolutely. Great. And Craig, I'll come back to you now actually on the point you raised about the things that didn't work. I suppose in a broader sense, it'd be great to hear, as you said, pandemic hit and it was projections were kind of looking at worst case scenarios. So firstly, how did you kind of devise your new strategy and deciding what you were going to do from a fundraising perspective? And those things that didn't work, kind of what could you learn, and what could audience watching, what kind of lessons do you think that you can pass on from the things that didn't work so well to the people watching?
Oh, right, okay. I mean, it's very kind of you to suggest there was a strategy in the middle of it, Luke, because I think we felt like we were almost going from day to day to begin with. But I think, you know, the journey we went on is, I think, like probably most people, when it first hit, you know, it was kind of like, oh, it's not going to last very long. I remember saying to my team when we were sent home from the office, we'll be back in 2 weeks. And, you know, obviously we're still not back. And I think there was a sort of a week or 2 week of kind of like shock and paralysis about what's happening here. And then I think we quickly moved into, okay, let's just do what we planned to do, but do it virtually. So, you know, and for some of our products that just didn't work. And I would say probably within 3 to 4 weeks, we suddenly realized we were going to have to do things very differently. And we started to just spot trends and opportunities that we could jump on. So, and what we did with that is we have a very small innovation team of about 3 people at Macmillan. But what we did is we seconded about 15 people into that team, because we had people who, whose normal fundraising stream of work had stopped. So we're like, let's use you. So we built up this sort of innovation pod, and they started just looking for trends and things that, that people were doing. So the most successful one we had was, I'm sure most people did an online quiz of some sort last year. So we turned that into a fundraising product. We called it Games Night In, and we raised £2 million from it, which is phenomenal. But we tried things like virtual dinner parties. That flopped. We lost money on that. We tried things like virtual cycle rides, things like at-home bikes, sort of Peloton type thing. That didn't work either. But then we tried things like a squats challenge, do 100 squats a day for 30 days, and that landed really, really well. And I think what we learned from that was we just needed to try lots of things really quickly. Try and make sure that they're embedded in some sort of trend or insight. Let's not throw everything out there, but try and identify something, be agile, put something out there, test and learn. And if it didn't work, kill it quickly. And if it did, then really pile in behind it and scale it as much as we can.
Great, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And Katie, on a similar theme, I guess, what did you guys learn about fundraising and over this last 18 months or so? And I suppose, how do you think it's going to change the future of fundraising in the next couple of years and beyond?
Yeah, big questions. So I think that, sort of similarly to Craig, I think that we learned that there were things that you could switch to a digital space or a virtual space quite quickly, and things that you absolutely couldn't. I think what was interesting for us is that we went as an organisation very quickly into an almost entirely emergency response space. So it gave us a very, very clear, focused message to all of our supporters and potential supporters about what we were there to do and where their money was going to go. So I think a lot of our learning actually has been about how we position ourselves and what our supporters want and need from us, as much as about the success of individual products. And I think one of our biggest learnings perhaps has been about really investing in understanding our audiences and understanding our supporters and being able to respond to them almost sort of in real time. So good example of that is that I'm lucky enough to have a supporter experience team who sit underneath me. So we have a few people who are responsible of making sure that we treat our supporters really well and that we have audience-based sort of insight. But what we learned quite quickly is that our supporters needed slightly different things from us during this period. They wanted to understand more quickly the impact of what they were doing, but they also wanted us to understand them as a whole person with all the stresses and pressures that were coming around them. So we started to shift our message to one that was much more about kind of give and get. So it was about, here's the support we can offer you at the moment, as well as here's the support we need from you. And we had a huge positive response to that. And I think what it's done is it's left us with a pool of very engaged donors who we continue to, particularly via email, but we continue to be able to communicate with and have much more of a dialogue than perhaps we've had in the past. And so I think that bit about investment in supporter experience was something we already knew, but I think really came to life, and the sort of direct benefits of it. The emails that we sent out last year were some of our most successful fundraising emails, as well as being there and about explaining to people about how we could support them. It built that environment where people were more likely to actually give to us. So there was a sort of, mutual benefit there. I think that we also learned that in this kind of situation, you've got to get that balance of proactive and reactive. And I think that's the bit that we're sort of learning from now, which is we were absolutely in response mode for over a year. And that burnt out our staff. It's left us with a brilliant pool of potential supporters and supporters who came on board and new people. But it's now thinking, actually, how do we now get back to a slightly more proactive stance to our fundraising? And for us, that is that continued understanding about audience, developing very kind of audience-led products for our fundraising and making sure that we move into that space. I think just to sort of conclude briefly, I think the thing that really came to the forefront for us was about that message around relevance. So being able to show who we were and why it was important to support us. during that period. And where we've seen that continue to play out is that we're developing more and more cause-linked products. So one of our most successful new fundraising products is one called Miles for Refugees, which is, it's a virtual event. It's sort of, there's loads of them in the sector, cover a certain distance within a certain amount of time, go out, get sponsored to do it. But what we saw is we managed to kind of capitalise on a moment where there was a hugely positive sentiment towards refugees in the UK. Similarly, we're having that conversation around the work we're doing with people who are coming from Afghanistan into the UK at the moment. And that really meant that it was a fundraising moment, that kind of a fundraising product that had its time. And we managed to really ramp up the success of that on the back of it feeling a very relevant cause at the time. So that's increasingly where we're learning, which is what's the stuff that feels particularly important to our supporters and where's that relevance.
Oh, thank you. So yes, comprehensive. Thank you, Katie. And Pradnya.
Yeah, so for us, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, you go.
No, I was just going to say, for us, we realized, strangely, for an ed tech nonprofit, that people were zoomed out very, very early on. And so we leaned into the one-on-one conversation. And even to the point where asking for a donor's time was, can I talk to you on the phone for 15 minutes? Because people, have reached the point where, and this wonderful gathering notwithstanding, have reached the point of just wanting some pre-pandemic normalcy. And remember, there was a time when we used to pick up the phone to our donors instead of everything having to be a Zoom call. And so, communicating with them, I want to echo again what Katie said, is treating them like they are experiencing the same challenges and difficulties, and understanding that philanthropy might not be top of mind.
Yeah.
And so to make it an easy lift for them to engage. And so whether I've had whole conversations about gifts on text, or about, or in that 15-minute phone call, because that executive or CSR lead is at home with her kids, just like I am. And so finding a way to bridge, it's all become, and maybe this is an American thing, I don't know, but it's all become less formal.
Right.
Every conversation starts with, I'm sorry, you're going to hear my dogs barking in the background. You might see my kid come in and ask for a tissue. And it's built this openness that I think is one of these silver linings of this pandemic, that we're all in it together. And so it's made the philanthropy conversation a little easier as well. So we've just, been trying very hard to, and again, I come from a slightly different perspective, which is a fairly limited, not the right word, a concise donor base. Yeah. And so it's really been about those one-on-one conversations and plotting a path forward with each one that has been really important for us.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Can I come back to, something that Katie said around relevance that I think was a really important thing for us, because I think the British Red Cross here in the UK did a phenomenal job. We're on the front line of the coronavirus response. We had an issue at Macmillan where we struggled for the first couple of weeks to find our relevance, because as a cancer charity, cancer suddenly went from being a major sort of agenda item to being totally wiped off the map in terms of, people weren't being diagnosed, treatments were stopped. And we spent a couple of weeks going, gosh, we were seeing money pouring in, fundraising pouring in for the NHS, and thinking, okay, what about us? There's nothing we can do here. But we very quickly had to flip to, okay, what is our relevance in this situation? And, you found stories of our Macmillan nurses who were working out of hours to, on the front line dealing with coronavirus during the day, but working out of hours on their own time to support their cancer patients, or stories about people with cancer who were being forgotten about and bringing those to the fore. And what we also learned as well was that actually for many of our donors, it wasn't a choice between supporting frontline coronavirus efforts or supporting us. It actually was supporting frontline coronavirus efforts and supporting us. And I think that was an important mindset, because it was very easy to get negative about it and go, oh, well, there's no role for us here, we've been squeezed out. But actually, that wasn't the case at all. And I think once we realized that, then we found our place and found our relevance.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. So yeah, I think it's quite a nice segue into the next portion of questions, which is really starting to get into some of the specific fundraising areas. And we're having lots of questions coming in, and I know there's lots of interest in looking a bit deeper into some of these areas. And one that's already triggered some interest, Craig, was your mention of the digital games night, the games night in. So that would be great to just hear a bit more about that, kind of how that was executed, what that looked like, and obviously how that generated benefit for you guys.
Great. So, I mean, we were all talking at work about, another quiz night, another family quiz night, and we realised that this was a trend that was happening, and we started to see people raising money for us from doing this. And we actually had a volunteer, a local volunteer committee group who had organised an annual quiz night for us for many, many years, and it did very well, and it raised about £50,000 a year, which was brilliant. And we went, okay, why don't we just take their quiz and take it out virtually? So all we had to do was promote it. All the materials were there. We put a little bit of marketing spend behind it and pushed it out, and it really, really blew. So then we said, okay, well, let's sort of produce a proper pack for it, some ideas, and we kind of built and iterated from there. And then we had people coming back to us saying this worked really well. Do you have another quiz? We want to do something else. So we introduced a sort of murder mystery, whodunit type event. We introduced a race night, and just as many sort of virtual online games as you could think of it. But again, at every point we were just gathered, speaking to our supporters and saying, what are you doing during the pandemic? And then picking up what they were telling us and then putting it out there. And we thought that once we got to Christmas, we thought that would be the end of it. But actually, we're finding that there's still demand for it, particularly from our corporate partnerships. Corporate partners, because companies are no longer, or most of them aren't in the workplace anymore, but people still want to feel connected. How do you bring people together? So this is a brilliant product that says, okay, it's good fun, you get to raise money, but also it's a great way of connecting people who aren't physically together anymore. So it's having a second wind, and it's going really, really well.
Great.
And I'd just to build on that, I think there's something that's so true about it. Finding those spaces that people are already in, rather than spending a lot of time and energy trying to create them. So we had, not to the same level, but we had quite a lot of success with launching a product around gaming and streaming, so online gaming, computer games, and rather than sort of try and create our own space, we work with a lot of influencers. And I mean, I've learned so much about the amount of people who spend time watching other people play computer games online. Fascinating world. It's sort of, you can go down quite a rabbit hole on that, but it's a massive area, it's a massive market, and actually by working with people who are already in there, who already had established audiences, we were able to get some products out quite quickly, and people loved it because it was quite a lot of them already fundraised. It was a moment where they said, look, we'll do 24-hour gaming, we'll stream it live, we'll make a donation, and we were seeing sort of hundreds of thousands of pounds come in through that route. With we had some investment from our innovation team in building some of those networks and relationships, but actually relatively low cost way of just tapping into a space that was already there.
Yeah, I think that kind of answers, but one of the questions that came in from Rachel was, did you see any kind of digital activation that you had to pivot to that will actually now be maintained? And I think from what you both said there, Craig and Katie, I think there's lots within that certainly will be kind of maintained within your future fundraising activity. But Franny, a question, I suppose, that lots of the people in the audience, and Sport for Development is kind of perennially facing this challenge sometimes, that some of the causes and some of the work is quite nuanced in terms of trying to get the messages across, and it takes quite a lot of engagement. And with the digital fundraising market being so saturated, so obviously so many people competing for attention, kind of what would your advice be to somebody who perhaps didn't have a huge budget or an instantly recognizable brand in trying to actually kind of formulate a digital fundraising approach that can kind of connect with an audience, whether that's just a small one that needs to grow, or if it's a large audience? What would you say is kind of the main things to think about when trying to do that?
Mm-hmm. So, and actually Code.org is an example of this, right? We are a relatively small organization, a young organization, and I would say that the critical piece, well, two things. One is making your marketing director your new best friend. right? Because the digital fundraising follows on the strength of brand recognition, of brand penetration, of really understanding who your audiences are, and at what level that fundraising can be done, right? So one typically thinks of digital fundraising as direct response, mass market, but again, for us, so we just launched with a partner, a community fundraising partner, a company that has, and I consider this digital, has offered NFT to, they're selling NFT or asking for investment in NFT on OpenSea.io, all proceeds to benefit code.org. And so the digital fundraising piece, the market that we're trying to access in something like that, right, are the folks that are into cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Which, is not your typical mass market, digital viewer or consumer. And so we focused on getting, leaders in the cryptocurrency world to retweet for us, or having, because the NFT are focused in the international space, really thinking about who we can access there. And so, and really keeping with the spirit of our organization and how we fundraise, because we are not ever going to really be prepared to go from our existing donor base to immediately into mass market. So really focusing our efforts in leveraging our strengths, which is things like our Twitter following, and reaching the one, so and it's quite all new to me. I love what you said, Katie, about learning about gaming, because same thing. I am learning about NFT. I'm learning about Ethereum, and what the mindset of a donor versus an investor is, because one of the nuances of this approach is that code.org benefits from the initial investment or the initial purchase of the NFT, the token, but then 20% of subsequent resales in perpetuity. And so that has the potential to last as long as NFTs are in fashion, but hopefully well beyond that. And so really for us, it's been about niche thinking and not going, trying to, even though we have a very wide user base, right? We have 2 million teachers on our platform, not overextending ourselves too quickly into a space that we're not ready for.
Yeah.
And to always be thinking about that return on investment.
Yeah, great, and that's a really great segue, Pradnya, into my next question, which I'll come to you with, Craig. I think, again, so many people on the call today will be really small. They might be volunteer led. They may have one employee, a couple of employees, and to your point, Pradnya, about return on investment, they've got such limited capacity and time to invest in fundraising. So it's really trying to make sure they focus it in the best way possible. So what would your advice be, Craig, to a small organisation, sport for development, thinking about, we've only got this really limited scope, this limited resource, where to start, where to invest it to try and secure that best return?
That's a good question. I think it comes down to making sure you've got a really strong case for support. So that has to be at the heart of everything, because there are lots of organizations and individuals out there who have come out of the pandemic wealthier than they went in. There is a lot of money out there, but actually there's probably increased demand on those people. So I'm assuming if you're Zoom, or if you make toilet paper or something, you're inundated with charity requests at the moment. So I think having a strong case for support is vital. I think it's also about making sure that you are investing adequate time in your existing supporters, not only in terms of making sure that they are that they're feeling a real sense of gratitude and they feel part of your organization, but to they're a valuable source of insight that you can get for free, and they're a great way of getting other supporters in through their networks. That could be their friends, it could be their employers, it could be anyone else they know. And I think if you're going for an acquisition strategy, whether that be for individuals or companies, it's about making sure that you're going out with a really strong case for support, but to organizations or individuals for whom you are relevant, because relevance is really important. So don't go for a scattergun approach of, if I write to 1,000 companies, I might get one back. It's better to write to 10 for whom you are personally relevant to, with a strong case for support, and focus on that. And if you can make sure those 10, if you can take a beneficiary or a service user in with you to really talk about the difference you're making, I think that's probably the best thing you can do.
Fantastic. Yeah, and case for support, that's something in our work day in, day out, that's something we're always kind of banging home. That has to be critical. And Katie, from your perspective on case for support, what makes a great case for support? Whether that's a huge charity, if it's a startup, what are the kind of key components we need to think about when putting together a compelling case for support?
I think that what you're looking for ultimately in a case for support is a kind of strategic alignment between where there's donor interest and opportunity and where your organisation's need is greatest. Ideally in a sort of strategic space rather than we're going to have to turn off the lights tomorrow space, because that helps you build that dialogue. And I think that what you're looking for is to understand that for different audiences that might look slightly different. So as Craig said, that ability to bring it to life, to bring beneficiaries, to bring people into the room, whether that's in some cases that's literally into the room, in some cases it's through telling really compelling stories, is really critical. There are other audiences who are going to want really hard impact data and facts and figures, and I think it's about understanding who are you talking to and what do you need, and making sure that you're flexing that. I think there's also something really interesting at the moment about understanding where donor interest is and where people, what we're seeing is that we're hearing a lot about themes like loneliness, isolation, digital inclusion. It's this sense, and I think a lot of people who've perhaps done well over the last period of feeling that sense of understanding that there are people who've been left behind and wanting to help fill that gap. And that's a different, probably, philanthropic space than perhaps we were in pre-pandemic. And I think that almost every organisation probably on this call today in some way speaks to those themes. But I think it's about how you position yourself and how you tell your story in a way that brings to light those things that are particularly meaningful to funders now. And trying to make sure that, so it's not about flexing your programs to be totally donor led, but it's about the way you tell your story to feel that it ticks those boxes that people are looking for at the moment. And I think what I would say as well, which we said before, is it's about, sometimes it's just picking up the phone and understanding what people are actually looking for from you, and you can do that with any level of donor. And I think sometimes people are a little bit intimidated about the idea of doing that. Or if you're a team that works or someone who works in the space of sort of mass donor engagement, stuff like, you can get behind the products and the numbers and the mechanisms and sort of forget that there's people at the end of it, and that actually just pick up the phone and have a conversation with them can be really critically important. So I think the more you can do to really understand what are people wanting to hear from you, what's the stuff that's going to excite them, and then shaping how you present your case to do that. Then we can get a bit overly concerned about sort of technical case for support and what should all the component parts be. Ultimately, it's about telling a really compelling story about why there's need and making sure that fits what your organisation needs from those supporters.
Brilliant, thank you, Katie. Yeah, and I think again that takes us into the area which again has come up a few times around like corporate fundraising, corporate partners, and the fact that landscape is obviously always changing, and there seems to be a lot of discussion in the discourse at the moment around kind of co-creation and corporate partners really wanting to be involved in helping to shape initiatives and partnerships. Pradnya, what's kind of your take on this? What's your experience at Code.org in terms of how to really engage and build those relationships with corporate partners?
Yeah, so it actually, if I could dovetail on something both Katie and Craig said, which is, in the making of the case, in the finding alignment, right? And I think this is relevant particularly to corporate donors, is finding balance, right? In the finding alignment, in particularly for smaller organizations, is to be patient with oneself, right? And to find the balance between the gift that must be closed right away and the one where you are willing to invest time and energy in cultivating the relationship over a period of time, right? And to think of, and for a small team in particular, to think about what that balance looks like. And then likewise with the case for support, to find the balance between the stories and the impact and the data. And what I'm finding more and more is that, you know, in working with corporate funders, it's not a monolith, right? The person that you work with at a, let's say, a corporate foundation managerial level is always thinking in his or her mind about the accountability within his or her organization. And ultimately, if that organization is led by someone that is convinced by data, then be a friend to that manager and be always thinking about what can you do as the nonprofit, as the fundraising expert within your nonprofit to arm that partner within the company with what he or she needs. And sometimes that will be, you know, so again, it's finding that balance, right? Always, and I hesitate to say this because I do believe that there is such a thing as altruistic philanthropy, but particularly in the corporate space, there's different parts of the company, different leadership within the company are being measured themselves in different ways. And so to always be mindful of what the story is that you're telling, not just about your own organization, but about the value that you bring to that corporation. That it really should, you know, even if it is a David and Goliath situation, even if it is a tiny 3-person nonprofit and, you know, a 10,000 person company, there's still a story to be told there and a case to be made for mutual benefit. And so, you know, really honing in on that, I have found is, and those interpersonal relationships, right, of being a support and a partner to the person that can help you navigate the internal labyrinth of that company is really important.
No, I'd echo that in the sense that two of our, you know, big partnerships over the last year, and you know, and I accept that not everyone's going to be forming massive partnerships, but we've worked with both Aviva, who are a big insurance company, and Tesco, who are big retailer supermarkets. And they absolutely want to help and be at the front line of response. And they're both companies that have done well financially over the last period. But at the same time, they recognise as a business interest that by building more resilient, robust communities who are better able to respond at a moment of crisis that we've obviously all just been through, the better that is for their business model in the long run. And it's getting that mutual balance, and it doesn't, I think sometimes, you know, to build on Pranya's point, sometimes we can be a bit purist about motivation in here. And actually there's a space where it's certainly not about, you know, selling away your values or principles. Those are really critical. And, you know, as an organisation and a movement that works to a set of very strong fundamental principles, you know how important it is to understand what your ethical stances, your values are. But that doesn't mean there can't be a point of mutual value in the middle of some of these conversations. I think it's really important not to forget that.
Yeah. And always take the trouble, if you haven't, I'm saying this to the audience, to really read and think about the value statement that the company is expressing, right? You know, companies these days, in the world of DEI, in the world of, you know, employee engagement, they are saying very specific things about what motivates them. And really thinking about what that is and how that aligns with your organization, I've also found to be very useful. And to be thinking about where in the organization you need to engage. Is it with HR? Is it with marketing? Is it with the C-suite? You know, and don't assume that only one of those entry points is the right approach. Maybe it's multiple entry points.
Yeah. Fantastic, thank you guys. Just before we move on to kind of the final few questions, one area we haven't really touched on is institutional, trust and foundation, grant funding. So just quickly, Craig, it'd be great to kind of get your take. How do you see the kind of landscape at the moment, and potentially how that might change in terms of grant funding priorities? And I mean, all we hear from people we talk to is it's getting harder and harder to secure funding, it's more competitive. And again, how do you see that, and how do you see it evolving over the next year?
Because that's not been our experience at Macmillan over the last year. So trust and foundation fundraising really held up and actually grew along with legacies. It was the one area and online fundraising that grew during the pandemic. And I think that's, maybe we were fortunate, I don't know, but I think a lot of trusts and foundations who are sitting on, depending where they get their money from, whether it's endowment funds or trust funds, they're doing reasonably well. And I think, the economy here in the UK is looking significantly better than I think we thought it would do. Now, whether it will last or not, I don't know. But I think it comes down to that relevance point again. We're very fortunate at Macmillan, partly fortunate that we have a number of very long-standing partners that we've invested time and effort in for many, many years. And in some cases, to Pradnya's point, in some cases, we didn't get any money from some of them for 3-5 years, but we took the time to build the relationship. And certainly one of those, and forgive me, the name escapes me of the foundation, but they had previously, the biggest gift they'd given us previously was £100,000, and then they gave us £1 million last year because they said, we suspect you're really struggling, and we're not. So so here's a really big gift, and they've already said that they will match that gift for the next 3 years as well. So so it is tough, but there are organisations out there that are doing very well. Again, it goes back to the fundamentals I've talked about throughout, we've all talked about, which is about stewardship, relevance, case for support.
Yeah, absolutely. Brill, thank you, Craig. So yeah, kind of moving on to the final few questions. I want to kind of bring it back to really practical steps. Like I say, a lot of the organisations in this space will be small and limited in terms of their resource. So Katie, what would your kind of advice be if we were looking at kind of setting a fundraising strategy now? We're looking 3 years, 5 years. What are the kind of, where the places to start? What are the really important things to consider when developing a fundraising strategy now?
So having just been through a strategy development process, I can tell you, and I think this is relevant to all organisations, is it has to be people-centred. You have to start from the point of who are, and I think Craig said this earlier, who are your existing supporters, regardless of any sort of new acquisition plans? Who are you actually engaged with already? What do they want and what do they need, and how can you respond to that? And then who are the audiences out there who might be relevant to you, and how do you make sure that you're relevant to them, whether that's in a sort of high value fundraising space of a great case for support, or whether actually it's a more mass engagement where you just have a product that absolutely ticks the box for something that excites them and interests them. I think that bit about starting from the point of view of who's your audience and how do you build to respond to them is really, really critical. And I think it's worth spending a bit of time thinking about who your potential audience could be and your route to them in that. I think the other thing that I would say is, I think whilst there have been income streams that have been very successful and stood up over the last year, and I think your report sort of highlighted this as well, the organisations that are thriving are the ones that have a diverse portfolio of income. And I think what I would say is it's really easy to go after the space that feels easy or comfortable, but it just takes one thing to happen for the tap to be turned off in that space, and then suddenly, you're really challenged. I mean, if you look at in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same in other places, a lot of organisations hugely dependent on, sporting challenge event type fundraising that just couldn't happen during the pandemic, and that's a sudden, huge hole in income. So I think, that push for diversity, that focus on supporter experience and what people want from you, I think are really critical, and making sure that you're digitally literate and you understand the space that digital's going in, not just from a direct transactional giving point of view, but from building a route to building that pool of engaged supporters.
Brilliant, thank you, Katie. Pradnya, great to get your view in the same question.
Repeat the question again for me. I was so focused on Katie's good response.
Of course, yeah, just thinking about fundraising strategy and kind of bringing it back into kind of practical steps for organizations, where to start, where to focus and prioritize time.
So people-centered, exactly. I would, add to what Katie said that, and sometimes this is the hardest thing to do, but in the end, the most fruitful, which is engaging your boards and your volunteers effectively. There's personality goes in a lot of directions, right? When one does that, but on the other hand, you have the extra arms and legs and brains working, in helping you solve for what you're solving for and to leverage networks. And that requires an internal investment of building the relationship with the board members appropriately, training the board members appropriately, helping, making it an easy lift for them, right? Because the number one thing I hear from boards and high-level volunteers is, I don't want to ask people for money. And that's what hinders them. And so my response is always, well, that's great, because I'm not going to need you to do that. I don't need you to ask for the money. What I need you to be is a vocal advocate, an ambassador, sit in the room with me, talk about why you're involved with the organization. Open your, do we say Rolodex anymore? I don't know, I still do. That's how long I've been doing this. Open your Rolodex, for our organization. Make it your philanthropic priority. And the second thing I would say, again, more internal facing than external facing, is to be really clear as an organization, especially the small one, about what are you fundraising for beyond unrestricted, and what are you willing to accept money for, right? Be firm in your conviction and not have your heads turned by the pursuit of money. When I firmly believe this, that clarity in what you are fundraising for and what are strategic priorities for your organization is what donors will respond the best to. So that was the other silver lining for us of this pandemic, is taking the time to for code.org to turn inward a little bit and take the time to we articulated 9 big bets for the organization that will take us through the next 5 to 10 years. And we actively evolved our thinking from a year-to-year fundraising strategy to what are the audacious ideas that a donor could resonate with over, say, a 5-year trajectory. And that, not that we're going to stop fundraising year over year, certainly we are, but that's also, as I was saying before, the difference between the gift pursuit in the moment and the long-term cultivation that, as Craig said, then yields the larger gift down the road. And particularly for private foundations, I found this to be important, right? They want to see the evolution of these ideas in many cases before making the initial investment.
Yeah, thank you, Pradnya. And just final question, Craig, coming back to something you mentioned earlier, actually, we talked a lot about kind of diversification, persevering with long-term stewardship and new areas of fundraising, but you also mentioned knowing when to kill it. So how do you kind of strike that balance to know actually this might be a longer term play, we need to stick with it, and when do you know actually this probably isn't for us, this isn't the right route for us?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the most useful thing I've found is to have someone alongside you who's good at killing things. So I've got a counterpart who's very good at going, no, enough. I think part of it is being clear at the start around what the purpose of any product or initiative is. So is it, so to go back to what Pradnya said earlier about balance, we now have a balance in our portfolio about short-term versus long-term. We might adjust that every quarter, but we've got a clear set of products and activities that are for long-term growth and some for short-term. So which is it? Set some metrics around it. They can be quick and dirty. And if it's not hitting those metrics, then can you quickly pivot it? If you can, great. If you can't, then kill it. If it's not working quickly, then throwing more money at it, more time and effort at it, which many of us don't have, particularly in small organisations, which is worth it. So you've got to be focused up front about what is there to do, and you've got to be, you've just got to be assertive and it's better in the long term to kill things.
Brilliant. Brilliant, thank you. I can't believe this hour's flown by, and we've had so many questions coming in, and apologies for those we haven't been able to get to the panel yet. We'll endeavour to try and get back to you with some responses over the next couple of weeks on those questions. But just before we kind of end, it'd be great to kind of get your guys' kind of closing sentiments, final thoughts, takeaways for us as audience members, to kind of like, what's the one key message or the one key thing we can take away into our own organizations that can really help us over the next couple of years with fundraising. So Pradnya, I'll start with you. Not asking you to distill all of your fundraising knowledge into a 15-second soundbite, but just, what would your one takeaway be for us?
Yeah, well, so in 15 seconds or less, I will say to our audience, which I hope are filled with, passionate fundraisers, is to be really proud of what you do. Really, I think that in a lot of I've worked in organizations where fundraising is only seen as a revenue source and not as a foundation of the organization. And most people who don't do what we do don't understand what we do. So, I say this to you as someone who does understand, really be proud of what you do, because you're bringing tremendous value, not just the money, but the passion, the knowledge. You really are the foundation of your organizations.
Fantastic, absolutely. Katie, over to you.
How do I put that? I mean, sort of similarly, I'd say it's not an easy environment out there to fundraising, so just keep going and good luck. But also, I think just don't be afraid to talk to your supporters, to learn from them, to engage them, because they're not scary. They're there to be your partners. They're there to support you through this, and your ultimate success will come in meeting their needs.
Absolutely, brilliant. Thank you, Craig.
Well, I saw a bit of insight this morning that Macmillan had commissioned, and interestingly, what came out of it is that the people that we'd spoken to, the causes that they felt were front of mind at the moment for them were mental health, isolation, and young people. So I think sport has a role to play in solving issues for all three of those. So I think there's a fertile ground for fundraising in sport at the moment and for sport. So go and smash it.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more with everything all three just said. Again, I can't believe we're nearly at the end. I thought I'd just try and summarize some of the notes I've taken. If you guys disagree with anything I say in terms of summary, please just shout out. But some of the messages that I think have come through really, really clearly, really emphatically. One, make sure you have a really strong, relevant case for support. That word relevance came up throughout today's discussion. I think it's a really important takeaway. Understand your donors, understand what's important to potential donors, and be really clear and targeted with that. Look after your current donors, of course. Support experience is crucial. Existing donors gave more in the pandemic. Manage and harness those relationships. Don't be afraid to try and fail. Absolutely, we've got to try new things, diversify. If it doesn't work, as you say, Craig, have someone around you who knows when to kill things quickly. Don't spend time and energy trying to create new spaces and communities. Find the places where people are there already and where there's already alignment. I've got no shaking heads, so hopefully that's a good summary. And yeah, that brings us to the end. Just want to say huge thank you to Craig, Pradnya, and Katie for giving us your time and your insights today. I've done a lot. I'm sure the rest of the audience have. So yeah, we really appreciate everything that you've contributed today. A few final bits and pieces just to say, as I mentioned at the start, the survey for 2022 report launches today, and that will be in the chat box now, hopefully, if things are happening seamlessly. So the link to that survey will be there. We'll include that in all of the follow-up information as well. Please do take the time to complete that. We really appreciate it. Thank you again to our series partners, Laureate Sport for Good Foundation, sportanddev.org, Beyond Sport and Street Football World for your support. Thank you all in the audience for being so engaged, asking such great questions, and getting so much valuable insight from the panelists. And yeah, thank you. The recording will be coming out soon, and we will see you soon. So thanks again to the panelists. Thank you all for joining. See you soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.